this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today is part 5 of our Tempest Remastered set review, and we'll be looking specifically at the green cards today. Over the last 4 days, we posted videos on the channel for the white, the blue, the black, and then the red cards yesterday, and tomorrow we're going to look at the multicolor cards and the colorless cards in this Magic Online exclusive set. But today we're going to look at green, so let's go ahead and get started, and our first card is Illorin. And I don't really like this card in Limited. It's probably a better constructed card than Limited card, but here's what I don't like about it. You're paying 4 mana, 2 of it on color, and you get no immediate effect. So at this point, for this card to do anything for you, you have to start casting your small creatures as if they had flash before you get any sort of benefit, and that may or may not be a good benefit for you. And the other issue is it also does it to your opponents as well. So now all your opponents can do the same thing. Yeah, can you craft your deck to maybe get squeeze more advantage out of this than other decks? Yeah, you might be able to, but quite honestly, I just don't think it's worth including in probably 99.999% of your limited builds. Canopy Spider, and this is a good blocker. It's going to slow down the game a little bit. It can block like 2/2 flyers, which is pretty good for 2. It's not a bad guy at all in Limited, and the only thing to keep in mind, he's got a small body, so he's not going to be super offensive for you, but that's really not his role. Karna, and this is a limited bomb. This is the kind of card you really want to put into your build. It's a 5/4, it costs 6, it has trample, and you can regenerate it for 2 mana. Yeah, absolutely. And this guy's at the uncommon slot, so you're going to see this guy floating around. He's just a big house, and you'll see there's a trend here in green. There's a lot of really good limited creatures in green. This is just the first of a few of them that we'll look at. The only downside, I'd say, it's hard to splash this guy if you're just doing a green splash because it was double green, but awesome creature. Crashing Boars. I like this one a lot. It's a 4/4 for 5, so that's a fantastic limited creature. Don't let the rules text here bother you, though. If your opponent has an untapped creature, they kind of have to block it, but for the most part, it's just going to start eating up creatures if that's the case. Your opponent has a choice to make. Either they find a way to tap their creatures and you get in for 4 damage, or they don't tap their creatures and they start losing them. So either way, it's good for you. It's definitely a great card. The 2 green makes it a little hard to splash if you're just splashing green, but really fine creature. Alvin writes, and this is an okay buff for creatures if you have creatures with evasion, say, or maybe even just one creature with evasion. It's very cheap, it's easy to do. It's not always going to make your cut since it's a sorcery. If this thing was an instant, it'd probably make the cut much more frequently. But it is a little slower. Your opponent's going to see this one coming. Not a bad card by any means, but it's going to probably be a borderline card considering all the other great things that are in this set. Elvish Fury, and I kind of like this combat trick because this one is an instant, and early game it's a mini giant growth. You get to pay 1 green for a +2/+2. That's pretty cool. And late game, you just can start piling it on with the buyback, or at least getting it back to your hand to use it the following turn. So I really like this. The only drawback I can see to it is just simply that if you have a strong creature base, you're going to want a card like this. If you're playing something more controlling, then it might not always make the cut. But for the most part, if you're in green, this is probably going to be a good card for you. Endangered Armadon, and this guy's cheap. He's a 4/5 for 4, really fantastic limited creature. The drawback can be annoying, but it can be managed. It's not going to stop me from playing it. This isn't my favorite big creature, considering there's some other really good ones, but it is at the common slot, and I don't mind playing this in my limited deck. Herro, this is a very good ramp strategy card, and it can also help with color fixing, and this is a classic card. It's been reprinted many times. What I like about this is it works at instant speed, so if someone comes through with, say, a wasteland or like some sort of land destruction, you can kind of preempt that, sacrifice the land, and get 2 basic lands back from it. Not every deck's going to need this. You know, if you don't need that ramp strategy or you don't need color fixing, then Herro might not make the cut, but it's very good in cases where you need those things. Hardwood Dryad. It's another anti-shadow card, and it can come in very handy. What I like about it, too, is it's easy to splash. So even if I'm not playing green, if it's in my sideboard and I run into some shadow creature issues, I can potentially just splash some green to side this in. This will start in your sideboard, of course. That's the only downside to it, but you'll be very happy that cards like this exist when you're in a shadow matchup. Hardwood Giants. This guy's interesting. He's a 4/4 for 5, which is fantastic. So he's playable. He's easily playable. His ability makes him tap, which seems kind of odd because he himself is a 4/4, but if you sacrifice a forest, then he deals 2 damage to target player, not creature, but player. So I find that a little weird because I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, what does my opponent have on the board that's stopping me from getting my 4/4 through? Now, he doesn't have evasion, so there could be big creatures or maybe just a bunch of little creatures that I want to run this guy into, so instead I end up doing the direct damage. So not to say that ability completely is useless, it just feels a little misplaced to me. But aside from all that, he's a 4/4 for 5, so you're going to play him. The only word of warning is, be careful. Don't throw away your resources too early in the game. If you're in the mid game and you start sacrificing forests just to get 2 damage across, you may find yourself in a really odd spot. However, if your opponent's at 2 or 4, well, that's a different story. Hermit Druid. This is a good card. Now, it has a little bit of a niche role, so you're not going to necessarily include this in every deck you make, but here's where it's good. It's kind of nice if you know you need mana. Maybe you have some really big, pricey creatures in your deck, and you kind of have a ramp strategy going. This can help you ramp a little bit, but where it really shines is in a reanimation strategy, because this is letting you dump a lot of cards into your graveyard. So not all decks are going to need this guy or necessarily want this guy. He's a small body at a 1/1, but if you're doing the reanimation strategy or you're very desperate for ramp, he's there for you. Horn Sliver. So here's a monocolored sliver that's a 2/2. And he's going to come in, he's going to have synergy with Sliver, so that's awesome. And he's got a 2/2 body to start, which is also very good as well. Now, on his own, he might be one of the worst Slivers on his own, because obviously who needs a 2/2 trample creature? It's not really that exciting, but still, he's a 2/2 body for 3. There's worse things out there, and if you have any other Slivers that can complement him, then he starts to become a lot better quickly. Cracklin. And I really like this guy. This is a great late game creature, and there's been many cards that are similar to this. Kind of the creature's size is based on X. Really like this, but what kind of pushes this one over the top is he can regenerate for 2. That's awesome. There's some really aggressive regeneration costs in some of these creatures. You saw this in black, and you're also seeing it in green, and it makes for some creatures that are very hard to get rid of. So he does have regeneration, but his downside is he doesn't have evasion, so sometimes you end up with a big ground pounder that keeps getting chump blocked. That could potentially happen to this guy, but he's pretty good, and he's got the versatility that even if you have to play him mid-game, you're getting something out of it. Lowland Basilisk. This is just a very good creature. I mean, this is before the Death Touch terminology, so he basically has Death Touch. He's a 1/3, and he's just hard to deal with and limited, and he only costs 3, so he can really slow down the game, gum up the game, and maybe even allow you to get in for a few points of damage because your opponent might not want to block him if they got some good creatures on the board. Mana Bond. This is an interesting one. I'm partially a little surprised they even bothered to reprint this, just because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense in the limited environment. Maybe it's okay in your opening hand if you're playing a ramp deck and you just open up with this and a bunch of land and you know that you're hopefully going to draw some big house in the next few turns. I don't know, but even that sounds risky to me. It's much better constructed card than limited, and this most 99% of the time is going to miss in limited. You're either going to draw it too late or you're going to draw it and you're not going to want to discard the actual action in your hand just to get the lands out. So very odd card. Miri Cat Warrior. So we go from a not great card in limited to a fantastic card in limited. Here you go with a 2/3 with First Strike, Forest Walk, and Vigilance. It's only going to cost you 3 mana. That's amazing. The only drawback is she is legendary. Now she's rare, so there's not going to be a million copies of her going around, but she's legendary, so you can't really put her out in multiples, but what an incredible card. Mulch, and this is another one of those cards that's going to help you hit your land drops. It's very cheap. It's sorcery speed, which isn't as exciting, but it's common, so there'll be a lot of these floating around. It will help you get those land drops, but where it really shines is, again, with reanimation strategy. So if you're playing a reanimation strategy, Mulch is going to be a good card for you. The only downside in that case is maybe not as good late in the game, but a pretty good card in that kind of niche situation. Muscle Sliver. Now, this is probably the best sliver of all the slivers that they've reprinted. This is the engine for your sliver strategy. So, for those of you who played sliver decks in Legacy, basically the muscle sliver or other slivers that have the same ability are the ones that are just the power cards of that deck. You're putting out some other slivers to give evasion, like say flying or maybe first strike, stuff like that. But this is the one that's really powering the deck. So the same is going to be true in limited. This guy's at common level. If you're really going to be aggressive and try to draft that sliver deck, this is how to do it. You're going to need multiple copies of this guy. And then everything else you get at that point is gravy. If you get a bunch of these, you're going to have probably an okay sliver deck. It's just all about speed and size. And if you draft this guy just a one of, he's still a grizzly bear. It's not bad. So for 2, he does buff himself, so he does actually become a 2/2 creature. So not a bad card at all. Needlestorm. So Needlestorm is good against flying creatures, obviously. The only downside of this is it's going to start in your sideboard. It is a sorcery. These cards are usually nicer as an instant, but not the end of the world. It's a good card to have when you know you're up against some big flyers. Oath of Druids. Very interesting card. This could be okay in mid-range decks, but this is really for special builds. The thing with this card is you're putting out this enchantment. Now it only costs 2, but your opponent also gets the effect if you're not careful, or if you get to the point where you have more creatures than they have, which if you're using Oath of Druids eventually will happen anyway. This is just another one of those cards that's much better in constructed than it is in limited. In limited, this can miss or backfire on you, and it's just kind of one of those cards that's super powerful. You can probably daydream all day about these awesome scenarios of pulling this giant creature and your opponent just getting run over by it, but you do have to remember this does go both ways, so it could just as easily in a limited environment that's a little less controlled compared to a constructed environment could backfire on you. But this is a mythic rare. It's a super powerful card, and if you get a copy of this, you might have a chance to maybe play some Eternal formats on Magic Online and try this out. Overrun, and this is a fantastic win condition for green. This was actually first printed in the Tempest block. I believe it was Tempest, and then it was reprinted in core sets for many years, and they kind of reached a point where they felt it was too powerful because they were putting in core sets at the uncommon level, and if you played some limited with some of those sets, you really kind of realized that Overrun just was something you were always afraid of when you're playing against green, and it just instantly ended the game. So they started to take that away from, at least from core sets and stuff. But excellent card. It's a little hard to splash because it's 3 green. That's my only downside for it. But if you're playing a green deck, this thing's awesome. Include it. Provoke. And this is decent green removal, and it cantrips. Only costs 2, so a lot of value here. I like this card a lot. It's slightly conditional. It is dependent on the fact that your opponent does have a creature and that you have a creature that you can attack in that's bigger than their creature. So it almost feels like an early version of Fight, kind of, but really good removal for green. You'll use this. Rampant Growth. This is a classic ramp card. It helps with color fixing. That's one of the big things, I think. If you're trying to play a sliver deck or something, this is great for color fixing. Now, on the minus side, not all decks will need this. You're not always going to need the rampant growth effect. And obviously, it doesn't feel good when you pull this late game and you're already flooded on land and you get a rampant growth. So that's just kind of the nature of it. But ramp decks will want this. Reality Anchor. And here's another anti-shadow card, so I like that. And on top of that, it cantrips, so that's pretty cool. It's easy to splash with 1 green and 1 colorless in the casting cost, so very good kind of anti-shadow. I really like it. Now, downside is it will start in your sideboard, but that's to be expected. But I love the fact that you can splash this in. Next is Recycle, and here's another big enchantment that I'm not super excited about. In the late game, you end up paying 6 for this thing, and again, you don't necessarily get an immediate effect just because it's just so expensive. Now, after that, you get to play cards, which does include land, and kind of draw cards off that. But if anything happens, let's say you get discarded, your opponent makes you discard, and all of a sudden now, if you can't play a card, you can't draw a card, so you're just kind of stuck. So you're just taking a huge risk. You're paying a lot of mana for no effect. And I just can't get behind this. This is a tough one. Now, I don't know, again, maybe in Constructed you could build around this a little more and make it so that you can protect yourself from getting your hand taken away, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem strong to me. Routebreaker Worm. Now here's a house, 6/6 trample for 7. Absolutely, this is a limited bomb. Yeah, just like all the other super green centric creatures, not easy to splash with the double green, but you know what? This thing is awesome. Rootwaller, and this is a very versatile mid-range creature. It makes combat very difficult for your opponent. And if you've ever played with this card, it shows up in a lot of cubes and stuff. You pay 3 for a 2/2, so it's feels a little overcosted. But then you get the ability to pump it for 2 and get +2/+2 to end of turn. Now you can only do it once, but that's all you need to do it for. You just go in and attack, and now your opponent has to play this game. Well, if I block it with my 3/3, they're just going to pump it. If I don't block it, I'm taking 2, and then he's going to be able to cast something else. You know, so it makes things really difficult. Your opponent just has to make some tough decisions, and you're always on the favorable end of it. So this is a really nice card. Skyshroud Elf, and we're on a streak of just really strong green cards, and here's another one. Now, it costs 2. A lot of mana dorks cost 1, but you know what? I'm fine with that for a ramp deck. If this is all I got, it's all I got. So I'll pay 2 to be able to tap and get green mana. It gives you a little bit of fixing, too. May or may not be relevant, but what's important is you can tap it for green mana. It's going to accelerate you a little bit. Skyshroud Troll, and here's another cheap regenerator. I love these cards. This is a 3/3 for 4, and you only pay 2 to regenerate. Yeah, that's awesome. That's a bomb. Again, it's a very green-centric card, so you can't necessarily easily splash it, but still a very awesome card. Spike Breeder, and they have some of these spike cards are decent. So when you look at this one in particular, it's very versatile. It's at a good cost for what it does, and it gets better in the mid and late game, especially when you have expendable mana later on. You can kind of move counters around and stuff. So I like this one a lot. Spike Colony, and this is a 4/4 for 5, and this is another really good spike card. I really like this a lot. The extra ability helps to maintain its strength on the battlefield if it's targeted for removal, so really nice effect. And what I really like about this too, aside from all the other stuff, is it's only 1 green to cast for this 4/4, so this is a big green creature that's a lot easier to splash, so I really like these. Spike Feeder. Now maybe this is the weakest of the spikes, but it's not bad. It's still going to get you a 2/2 creature for 3 with the versatility to be able to move some counters around, or else maybe even gain a little life if you need to do that. It's a smaller body for the casting cost, but it has the flexibility. And Spike Catcher. Here's another bomb. So this one costs 7, but you get a 6/6 out of it, and it can regenerate. Absolutely, that's amazing. So it doesn't have evasion, which, you know, it sometimes kind of gets stuck, getting chump blocked and what have you. But this is another very good Spike card, and again, just 1 green, so it's splashable. Spined Worm. Here's just another big card, and it's a 5/4 for 5. You're going to use it in this environment. 5/4 for 5 is huge. Doesn't have evasion, so again, that can get a little frustrating at times, but overall, a very good limited card. Survival of the Fittest, and here's another mythic rare. This is another huge card over the years in Constructed. So how does it shape up in Limited? Now, it is a cheap way to search out your big creatures in the late game, or if you're looking to put some combos together, even if it's just like slivers. So this is pretty decent. I do like this. It's even better, obviously, with reanimation strategies, where you can discard a card that can later be reanimated. You'll play this in your creature heavy deck. Now, if you're not in a creature heavy deck, that's the downside to this. This isn't the type of card you throw in your control deck or anything like that. So it's really meant to be an aggressive way to find your big creatures, find your combo pieces, maybe find your slivers. So not for every deck, but if it fits in your deck, it can do very well for you. Trained Armadon, and this one's a 3/3 for 3, and that's just fine. That's a really good guy, and this is the common level, so there'll be a lot of these floating around. Again, it's a double green, so it's not going to be super easy to splash if you're just splashing green, but still a really fine limited guy. Tranquility. So this gets rid of some of those big, difficult enchantments. The only downside is it's going to start in your sideboard, so this is one of the original cards from Alpha being reprinted here. Very good way to get rid of enchantments. Now, keep in mind, it gets rid of your enchantments too, so be careful when you play that part. Verdant Force, and I do like this guy. Another limited bomb. The only thing is he doesn't have evasion. I feel like this guy should have trample. I don't know. Maybe like a force of nature just kind of reminds me of a little bit. And you know, a 7/7 creature that has no evasion isn't super exciting sometimes, but still he's going to do some work for you. And then on top of that, you get to put a lot of 1/1s into play, one at each upkeep. Notice that's at the beginning of each upkeep, not just your upkeep. So it starts to act, you put it out, it'll already act on your opponent's turn. So I do like this card a lot. It is very difficult to splash, obviously, with 3 green, so you have to be very devoted to green to make this thing work, but good guy. Vernain Touch, and this is a good buyback card to make lands useful in the late game. One of the things that can be frustrating limited when you just get mana flooded at the end of the game, you hit a land pocket, you're in control, your opponent stabilizes, you only need to get a couple more points of damage across, and you just can never do that because you keep drawing lands. Well, get this guy in your hand, and you can use this sorcery to just basically make all your lands into 2/2 creatures, or at least as many as you can afford with buyback, and maybe get those last few points of damage across. So not a bad card at all, limited. Verdigris, and this feels a little pricey for a 3 casting cost, destroy target artifact instant. We're a little spoiled because ever since Onslaught came out, we've had Naturalize, and Naturalize has been reprinted 6 million times, and we're very used to having that cost only 2, and it can destroy target artifact or enchantment. Well, this isn't as good, but you know what? If you do need to get rid of an artifact, it's going to be there for you. It's going to start in your sideboard, and it's going to be fine if you need it. And our last green card for the set review is Wall of Blossoms. And this card's awesome. This card shows up in cubes. It's actually currently in the Legacy cube that was just on over the holidays on Magic the Gathering Online. And this is just an awesome, cheap defensive card that cantrips. And that's awesome. For 2, you get an 0/4. It's going to slow down the game. It's going to protect you from some of the aggressive creatures. And you get to draw a card off it. Absolutely, every single time I'm including this in my deck. Really fine cards. So having said that, that is the end of the green cards for Tempest Remastered. So tomorrow we'll be back and we're going to do the multicolor and colorless cards. Then on Sunday I have another Tempest Remastered video where we're going to explore some of the mythic rares and compare them to our mythic rare speculation video that we did at the end of February and kind of give ourselves a report card on how we did. And then next week I got tons of stuff planned. I have some product openings. I have another Legacy Cube draft, which is a really great one that I'm going to post that I haven't been able to post yet because I've been doing these. And so we got a lot of good content coming up. So if you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet, this is a good time to do so. As always, have a great day.